Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Millerman. This is Millerman Talks. Today, I just wanted to go over a couple of things with you about Bitcoin and art, and in general, the problem of revitalizing an artistic spirit today. So, this is a book that you may have seen or know about called The Bitcoin Standard, the decentralized alternative to central banking. And there are some passages in this book that, when I read it, jumped out at me as being worth thinking carefully about, having to do with the connection of Bitcoin to the creation of great works of art. So that's kind of what I'd like to talk to you about today. We're going to go over this section called Artistic Flourishing. It begins with this argument that the contributions of sound money to human flourishing are not restricted to scientific and technological advance, which is an argument that he made earlier in the book. They can also be vividly seen in the art world. So for those of you who don't know, the idea of sound money, as you see here, just a simple explanation, is that sound money is money that is not prone to sudden appreciation or depreciation. The government is not just going to suddenly print $1 trillion worth. Again, sound money is money that's not prone to sudden appreciation or depreciation in purchasing power over the long term, aided by self-correcting mechanisms inherent in a free market system. In short, it's the idea that the money will not lose its value over time by being inflated through government policies. You have something that's more stable, something that's more long-lasting. And you see here, people ask, is Bitcoin sound money? And one of the arguments of the book is that it is. And the question is, what does sound money mean for artistic flourishing? Maybe a question that you haven't thought about before. Or maybe you have, but let's see what the book says about it. The contributions of sound money to human flourishing can be vividly seen in the art world. It's no coincidence that Florentine and Venetian artists were the leaders of the Renaissance, as these were the two cities which led Europe in the adoption of sound money. The Baroque, neoclassical, romantic, realistic, and post-impressionistic schools were all financed by wealthy patrons holding sound money, with a very low time preference in the patience to wait for years or even decades for the completion of masterpieces meant to survive for centuries. If you see or have seen in person or reproductions of these masterpieces of the Renaissance, you begin to wonder, what must their patrons have expected in order to be able to finance great works of art that take years or even decades to complete? Well, you'll see that part of the argument here is if they had lived under a monetary system where the money was losing its value rapidly by being inflated, then maybe it would be less likely for them to patronize such great works of art or offer patronage for them. The astonishing domes of Europe's churches, built and decorated over decades of inspired, meticulous work by incomparable architects and artists like Filippo Brunelleschi and Michelangelo, were all financed with sound money by patrons with very low time preference. The only way to impress these patrons was to build artwork that would last long enough to immortalize their names as the owners of great collections and patrons of great artists. This is why Florence's Medicis are perhaps better remembered for their patronage of the arts than for their innovations in banking and finance, although the latter may be far more consequential. This is an interesting idea here. The only way to impress the patrons was to build artwork that would last long enough to immortalize their names. Similarly, the musical works of Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and the composers of the Renaissance, classical, and romantic eras put to shame today's animalistic noises, recorded in batches of a few minutes, churned out by the ton by studios profiting from selling to man the titillation of his basest instincts. Could there be a relationship between this, animalistic noises that sell to man the titillation of his basest instincts, on one hand, and on the other hand, the nature of our money? Whereas the music of the golden era spoke to man's soul and awakened him to think of higher callings than the mundane grind of daily life, today's musical noises speak to man's most base animalistic instincts, distracting him from the realities of life by inviting him to indulge in immediate sensory pleasures with no concern for long-term consequences or anything more profound. The argument here again is that our money can habituate us to having long-term preferences that allow us to create great works of art over the long term, or by contrast, can habituate us to becoming enmeshed in the immediate sensory pleasures with no concern for the long-term consequences. It's not like money would be the only factor in that, but the argument of this section of the book is that money is a factor in that. It was hard money that financed Bach's Brandenburg concertos, while easy money financed Miley Cyrus's twerks. In times of sound money and low time preference, meaning here that the investor or the patron does not feel like he's got to satisfy his desires instantly or immediately. Let me just give you a better. I pause the video so I can pull something up for you. Someone with a high time preference is focused substantially on his well-being in the present and the immediate future relative to the average person, while someone with low time preference places more emphasis than average on their well-being in the further future. So a patron with low time preference is emphasizing their future well-being, their eternal glory, for example. Let's go back here. So in times of sound money and low time preference, artists worked on perfecting their craft so they could produce valuable works in the long run. They spent years learning the intricate details and techniques of their work, perfecting it and excelling in developing it beyond the capabilities of others, to the astonishment of their patrons and the general public. Nobody stood a chance of being called an artist without years of hard work on developing their craft. Artists did not condescendingly lecture the public on what art is. They didn't just take the money and run. And why their lazy productions that took a day to make are profound. Bach never claimed to be a genius or spoke at length about how his music was better than that of others. He instead spent his life perfecting his craft. Michelangelo spent 4 years hanging from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, working for most of the day with little food in order to paint his masterpiece. He even wrote a poem to describe the ordeal. I'm not going to read you the poem, but you see, he's suffering to a certain extent in his work. Should I read it? All right, let's read it. I've grown a goiter by dwelling in this den as cats from stagnant streams in Lombardy, or in what other land they hap to be, which drives the belly close beneath the chin. My beard turns up to heaven, my nape falls in. Fixed on my spine, my breastbone visibly grows like a harp. A rich embroidery bedews my face from brush drops thick and thin. My loins into my paunch like levers grind. My buttock like a crupper bears my weight. My feet unguided wander to and fro. In front my skin grows loose and long. Behind, by bending it, becomes more taut and straight. Crosswise I strain me like a Syrian bow, whence false and quaint I know must be the fruit of squinting brain and eye, for ill can aim the gun that bends awry. Come then, Giovanni, to succor my dead pictures and my fame, since foul I fare, and painting is my shame. Only with such meticulous and dedicated effort over many decades did these geniuses succeed in producing these masterpieces, immortalizing their names as the masters of their craft. In the era of unsound money, money that does not preserve its value over time, no artist has the low time preference or the long-term horizon to work as hard or as long as Michelangelo or Bach to learn their craft properly or spend any significant amount of time perfecting it. A stroll through a modern art gallery shows artistic works whose production required no more effort or talent than can be mustered by a bored 6-year-old. Sad but true. Modern artists have replaced craft and long hours of practice with pretentiousness, shock value, indignation, and existential angst as ways to cow audiences into appreciating their art, and often added some pretense to political ideals, usually of the puerile, childish, Marxist variety, to pretend play profundity. To the extent that anything good can be said about modern art, it is that it is clever in the manner of a prank or practical joke. Again, take the money and run. There is nothing beautiful or admirable about the output or the process of most modern art because it was produced in a matter of hours by lazy, talentless hacks who never bothered to practice their craft. Only cheap pretentiousness, obscenity, and shock value attract attention to the naked emperor of modern art, and only long, pretentious diatribes shaming others for not understanding the work give it value. As government money has replaced sound money, patrons with low time preference and refined tastes have been replaced by government bureaucrats with political agendas as crude as their artistic taste. Naturally, then, neither beauty nor longevity matters anymore, replaced with political prattling and the ability to impress bureaucrats who control the major funding sources to the large galleries and museums, which have become a government-protected monopoly on artistic taste and standards for artistic creation. Sorry, I paused to take a drink of my coffee and lost my spot. Where were we here? Naturally, then, let's go from here. Yeah, free competition between artists and donors is now replaced with central planning by unaccountable bureaucrats with predictably disastrous results. In free markets, the winners are always the ones who provide the goods deemed best by the public. When government is in charge of deciding winners and losers, the sort of people who have nothing better to do with their life than work as government bureaucrats are the arbiters of taste and beauty. Instead of art's success being determined by the people who have succeeded in attaining wealth through several generations of intelligence and low time preference, it is instead determined by the people with the opportunism to rise in the political and bureaucratic system best. A passing familiarity with this kind of people is enough to explain to anyone how we can end up with the monstrosities of today's art. You see the contrast. I don't need to emphasize it, but let's just reread this again. Beautiful characterization. Instead of art's success being determined by the people who have succeeded in attaining wealth through several generations of intelligence and low time preference, wouldn't you rather have those people, to a certain extent, determining or showing us master craft works of art than opportunists in the bureaucracy? In their fiat-fueled, ever-growing realm of control, almost all modern governments dedicate budgets to finance art and artists in various media. You don't need me to tell you, I'm sure you've all seen examples of horrific public art and very few examples of beautiful public art. As time has gone by, bizarre and barely believable stories have emerged about covert government meddling in arts for political agendas. While the Soviets funded and directed communist quote-unquote art to achieve political and propaganda goals, it has recently emerged that the CIA retorted or responded by financing and promoting the work of abstract expressionist mattress and cardboard molesters, such as Mark Rothko and Jackson Pollock, to serve as an American counter. Only with unsound money could we have reached this artistic calamity, where the two largest economic, military, and political behemoths in the world were actively promoting and funding tasteless trash picked by people whose artistic tastes qualify them for careers in Washington and Moscow spy agencies and bureaucracies. Again, underscoring for you here the main argument of this polemically entertaining and insightful analysis. Only with unsound money could we have reached this artistic calamity. As the Medicis have been replaced with the artistic equivalents of DMV workers, the result is an art world teeming with visually repulsive garbage produced in a manner of minutes by lazy, talentless hacks looking for a quick paycheck by scamming the world's aspirants to artistic class with concocted nonsensical stories about it symbolizing anything more than the utter depravity of the scoundrel pretending to be an artist who made it. That is fantastic. Mark Rothko's art took mere hours to produce, but was sold to gullible collectors holding millions of today's unsound money, clearly solidifying modern art as the most lucrative get-rich-quick scam of our age. I promise you last time, I'll say it, but take the money and run. No talent, hard work, or effort is required on the part of a modern artist, just a straight face with a snobby attitude when recounting to the nouveau riche, the new rich people, why the splatter of paint on a canvas is anything more than a hideous, thoughtless splatter of paint, and how their inability to understand the work of art, unexplained, can be easily remedied with a fat check. What is astounding, and by the way, we're getting towards the end of this particular section on artistic flourishing. What is astounding is not just the preponderance of garbage like Rothko's in the modern art world. By the way, in the comments, you should feel free to show examples that you think are in line with his analysis or examples that you think are a counterpoint to his analysis. What's astounding is not just the preponderance of garbage like Rothko's in the modern art world, it's the conspicuous absence of great masterpieces that can compare with the great works of the past. You do feel that, don't you? One cannot help but notice that there aren't too many Sistine chapels being constructed today anywhere, nor are there many masterpieces to compare with the great paintings of Leonardo, Raphael, Rembrandt, Caravaggio, or Vermeer. Is that because nobody has the talent? Or can it have something to do with the nature of the money, among other things? This is even more astonishing when one realizes that advances in technology and industrialization would make producing such artwork far easier to accomplish than it was in the golden era. Yeah, a little bit longer. The Sistine Chapel will leave its viewer in awe, and any further explanation of its content, method, and history will transform the awe into appreciation of the depth of thought, craft, and hard work that went into it. Before they became famous, even the most pretentious of art critics could have passed by a Rothko painting, neglected on a sidewalk, and not even noticed it, let alone bothered to pick it up and take it home. Only after a circle jerk of critics have spent endless hours pontificating to promote this work will the hangers-on and aspirant nouveau riche begin to pretend there is a deeper meaning to it and spend modern, unsound money on it. Several stories have surfaced over the years of pranksters leaving random objects in modern art museums only for modern art lovers to swarm around them in admiration. I'm sure you've seen the story of the guy who accidentally left his eyeglasses, like reading glasses, on the floor, and suddenly people gathered around taking pictures thinking it was the next brilliant work of artistic genius, illustrating the utter vacuity of our era's artistic tastes. But there's perhaps no more fitting tribute to the value of modern art than the many janitors at art exhibits worldwide who, demonstrating admirable perceptiveness and dedication to their job, have repeatedly thrown expensive modern art installations into the dustbins to which they belong. Some of the most iconic quote-unquote artists of our era, such as Damien Hirst, Gustav Metzger, Tracy Emin, and Italian duo Sarah Goldschmied and Eleonora Chiara, have received this critical appraisal by janitors more discerning than the insecure people who spend millions of dollars on what the janitors threw away. A case can be made for ignoring all this worthless scribbling as just a government-funded embarrassment to our era and looking beyond it for what is worthwhile. Nobody, after all, would judge a country like America by the behavior of its incompetent DMV employees napping on their shift as they take out their frustrations on their hapless customers. And perhaps we shouldn't judge our era by the work of government workers spinning stories about piles of worthless cardboard as if they were artistic achievements. But even then, we find less and less that can hold a candle to the past. In From Dawn to Decadence, a devastating critique of modern demotic, means like vulgar culture, Jack Barzoon concludes, all that the 20th century has contributed and created since its refinement by analysis or criticism by pastiche. Hold on a second. He concludes, all that the 20th century has contributed and created since is refinement by analysis or criticism by pastiche and parody. Okay, so they have created nothing new, nothing good, certainly nothing beautiful, long-lasting, or glorious. Barzoon's work has resonated with many of this generation because it contains a large degree of depressing truth. Once one overcomes one's inherent bias to believe in the inevitability of progress, there's no escaping the conclusion that ours is a generation that is inferior to its ancestors in culture and refinement. In the same way, the Roman subjects of Diocletian, living off his inflationary spending, you see once again linking this decline to money, and drunk on the barbaric spectacles of the Colosseum, could not hold a candle to the great Romans of Caesar's era, who had to earn their aureus coins with sober, hard work. That was a lot to read, but I hope that you found that fascinating, because when I read this chapter, I was amazed, not having done a lot of reading in Bitcoin previously, to see a connection between the idea of sound money and the idea of artistic flourishing. Something that should concern all of us if we're sick of the trash that he describes so well. So again, I was reading from this book, The Bitcoin Standard, The Decentralized Alternative to Central Banking. I read you this section on artistic flourishing, and I'd love for you to comment with your thoughts on that. Again, the claim here was that sound money, money that's not prone to sudden appreciation or depreciation, is more likely to finance great works of art than the kind of fiat money that gets overinflated and produces garbage. Okay, two other things on art. First, if you can see, nothing's up here that shouldn't be up here. That's good. We have this quote from Zero H.P. Lovecraft a couple of days ago, writing as follows: "You cannot, in any scheme for the reformation of society, aim directly at the flourishing of the arts. These activities are byproducts for which we cannot deliberately arrange conditions. But their decay may always be taken as a symptom of some social ailment to be investigated." And I thought that was an interesting claim, so I asked people to agree or disagree and say why. And I'd like you also to say something in the comments or come onto this thread on Twitter and share your thoughts about that. So, is it true that you cannot, in any scheme for the reformation of society, aim directly at the flourishing of the arts? Or could you aim directly at the flourishing of the arts? And I think this part is acceptable even without having to say whether we agree or disagree. The decay of the arts is a symptom of some social ailment. I think that's clear enough. If we used to have something beautiful and now we have something ugly and trashy and unworthy, undignified, and clearly having fallen from some glorious height, well, we got to wonder why that happened. And in the Bitcoin standard, that's investigated in terms of the nature of the money. There may be other ways that you can answer the question, why the degradation of the arts? There may be people who defend take the money and run, or Rothko, or art that's indistinguishable from trash in some theoretical way. Maybe that's also worth considering, but it's hard to see something beautiful and something ugly and conclude that the ugly represents progress over the beautiful. Well, in any event, the claim here, you cannot, in any scheme for the reformation of society, aim directly at the flourishing of the arts. I just wanted to share that with you and see what you think about it in relationship to what we just read from the Bitcoin standard. And then the last thing, I actually haven't looked at this yet myself, so I'm viewing this with you for the first time. I actually want to just pull up for you what the original post about this was. So 1 second. Okay, I have it here. This is Twitter user Lomez. You see here you go, LOM3Z. Friends, the long-awaited and much anticipated Passage Prize is now open for submissions. Fiction, poetry, nonfiction, and visual art, $10,000 plus in prizes. Please read the guidelines for additional details. All are welcome to submit. So here is the Passage Prize. Exit from the Longhouse. Poetry judge, Curtis Yarvin. Some of you probably know who Curtis Yarvin is. Used to write under the pen name Mencius Moldbug. Years ago, people told me about him when they knew that I was working on Alexander Dugin, but it took me a long time to find the time and get on the wavelength. But Curtis Yarvin, you should look into some of what he's been saying in recent podcast appearances and interviews if you don't know who he is. And the fiction judge, Zero H.P. Lovecraft. Let's see what we have here. Fiction, essays, poetry, visual art. Any power struggle is preceded by a verification of images and iconoclasm. This is why we need poets. They initiate the overthrow, even that of titans. Imagination, and with it song, belong to the forest passage. Ernst Junger. Passage Prize is a literature and arts contest open to anyone reading this. There is a $10,000 prize pool that will be awarded to winning entries in the categories of fiction, poetry, visual art, and literary nonfiction. Winning submissions will be collected in a physical and digital volume to be published by Passage Press in partnership with Canonic. Entrants are encouraged to review the guidelines and prize details before submitting, as well as the editor's note before. You can then make an entry if you'd like, and if you win, your winning entry will be collected in a physical and digital volume. Support real art. Passage Prize is currently accepting donations to help fund the endeavor. To donate Bitcoin, Ethereum, or USDC, please select the appropriate QR code below. For those of you who want to support prizes like this. And I'll just mention in passing, if you want to support online education in philosophy and political philosophy, please visit millermanschool.com or reach out to me. I also will be accepting donations and scholarships and sponsorships. And I think that we should be aware of everybody who's doing this kind of thing and support the experiment. So Support Real Art Passage Prize is accepting these donations. Here are the QR codes. You can find them at passageprize.com. We keep going and see what else we have. A note from the editor. Am I going to get kicked off? Is my channel going to get demonetized? I don't even monetize most of these videos, so that's not a big deal, but I wouldn't want to get the channel kicked off. Let's read this anyways. Dear reader, we live in an age of profound cultural rot. There's a stench of dying all around us. Now, to a certain extent, this is what you saw in the passages here on Artistic Flourishing. There's no life here. What passes for literature, film, drama, poetry, art of all kinds is bloodless and barren, the agitprop for a regime of shrill human resource mediocrities. Or what he called here, the DMV. Nothing against those of you who are watching this who happen to work in the DMV. Go read the novels shortlisted for the big prizes. Whatever of poetry still even exists. The undifferentiated fare at your local theater. In other words, go check these things out and you'll see that there's nothing there. What you will find will burn your eyes. You'll feel like your veins have been scraped out with a rusted spoon. Whereas art is meant to inspire and edify, this culture is meant to demoralize. It's meant to turn you against yourself, to debase you into submission, to condition you to the pod. We don't have to accept this. Outside this longhouse of putrid moralism, a frontier awaits us, a new virgin territory. There are worlds yet to be discovered, ways of being that do not reduce us to a state of meek, unrelenting surrender. There are portals, enormous and powerful energies latent in the graves of prehistory, waiting for a hand, a mind, an imagination to retrieve and transform them into the creative spirit that will light a new way forward. And therefore, the call here is to demonstrate through art, story, symbol, and invention what it means to leave this rotten place behind, to give life to a language and a temperament that is not afraid and that will not passively abide the cruel and craven bugmen who presume to rule us. Lomas writes, this is a calling that transcends any partisan sniping, any lowly ideological... okay, you see that? Let us raise ourselves and each other above such things. Let us imagine a passage from this place to another one. Let us stake out a path. Dream it into existence. Join me. The only way out is through. Well, the reason I wanted to show this to you, first of all, is because I hadn't seen it. I'd only seen it come across my timeline, and I wanted to have a look at it together with you. And the second thing is to just relate it, again, to these claims from the Bitcoin standard. Is there a relationship between degradation of art that's indexed to fiat money, inflationary money, and money that loses its value rapidly over time, and to the lack of glorious works of art? And what are people doing who are trying to remedy that situation on the artistic side? You can look here, the various guidelines to the contest, who selects the winners, what kinds of poems, what kinds of visual art, what kind of literary nonfiction, what the prizes are, $1,500 first prize, second prize, third prize. If you are doing these things, fiction, essays, poetry, visual art, you should probably have a look at that and see whether you can submit something. Another site I wanted to take the opportunity to promote is this one here, IM1776, im1776.com. They're publishing on Nietzsche, on Heidegger, on Strauss, Curtis Yarvin. They interviewed Michael Anton not too long ago, as you see here, and they had some pieces on Afghanistan. It's a good journal, and you can go there and donate to support them if you'd like. I already told you that, well, Millerman School, you know, okay? millermanschool.com, that's me, my work in philosophy and political philosophy. So that's pretty much it for today. What I wanted to talk to you about was the Bitcoin standard, that post about whether or not you can aim directly at the flourishing of the arts or whether that's a function of something else, so that we can only learn from the degradation of the arts, but we can't just directly stimulate them again. And finally, the Lomas Prize as an example of somebody, or as an example of a venture that is trying to stimulate the flourishing of the arts by incentivizing it with these prizes. Please comment if there's anything that you liked or didn't like. Visit millermanschool.com if there are courses in Leo Strauss, Carl Schmitt, Martin Heidegger, Alexander Dugin, or Plato that you might like to take. There's a free trial there with many hours of free lectures for you to see what, if anything, you like. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. See you in the next video.